Welcome to the Behind Story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a crazy story. Let's jump right in. I'd just gotten out of the pool, the water still clinging to my skin, when I heard the unmistakable sound of someone making themselves at home where they had absolutely no right to be. At first, I thought I was imagining it, the light scraping of a lounge chair being adjusted, the muffled splash of water, the distinct, almost performative sigh of someone basking in relaxation. I froze on my way inside, towel half draped over my shoulders, and turned toward the noise. And there she was, a woman, probably in her mid-40s, sprawled across one of my poolside lounge chairs. Her oversized sun hat and gaudy sunglasses were straight out of a reality TV show, the kind where wealthy suburbanites throw wine at each other. Her head was tilted back in pure bliss, like she was soaking up the sun on a tropical vacation, except this wasn't a resort. This was my backyard. Her son, a boy around 10, maybe 11, was splashing in my pool, giggling like he'd just discovered paradise. He kicked off from the side, sending a wave of water crashing against the deck. My deck. I blinked. What the hell? Excuse me, I said, my voice tight as I stepped forward. What are you doing here? The woman lazily tilted her head up, regarding me with all the interest of someone noticing a minor inconvenience. Oh, she said, waving a hand as if dismissing me. Hi there. It's such a hot day, don't you think? I stared at her. Was she serious? Yes, it is, I said, trying to keep my voice level. That doesn't explain why you're in my backyard. She laughed. Actually laughed, like I had just cracked a light-hearted joke instead of pointing out the obvious crime she was committing. Oh, don't be so dramatic. My son just wanted to cool off, and the lake is too cold this time of year. I looked from her to the kid, who was still happily splashing away in my private pool. My heated pool. I let out a slow breath, clenching my towel. Right. That still doesn't explain why you're trespassing on my property. She rolled her eyes, like I was the one being unreasonable. It's just water. You have plenty of it. And honestly, don't you think it's a bit selfish to keep it all to yourself when there are kids around who just want to have fun? I took a step forward, no longer bothering to hide my disbelief. Lady, I don't know who you think you are, but this is my home, my pool, and you are on my property without permission. You need to leave. The transformation was instant. Her relaxed, smug expression twisted into one of exaggerated offense. She straightened up in the chair, adjusting her sunglasses dramatically. Wow, she huffed. You really don't have to be so rude. Rude? I repeated, almost choking on the word. Rude? I wasn't the one who had waltzed onto someone else's property, like I owned the place. I'm just trying to keep my child happy, she continued, arms crossing over her chest like she was the victim here. You wouldn't deny a child the simple joy of swimming, would you? Oh, she was one of those. I took another breath, pinching the bridge of my nose. Look, I don't care if the lake is cold. I don't care if your kid wants to swim. This isn't a public pool. It's my private property, and I'm asking you, politely, to leave. That was the wrong thing to say. Her face darkened, lips curling into a sneer. Wow, just wow. No wonder society is so selfish these days. She turned to her son, shaking her head in a show of exaggerated disappointment. See, honey, some people just don't know how to share. I swear my eye twitched. Lady, I'm calling the cops. That got her attention. She shot to her feet so fast, her stupid sun hat nearly flew off. Oh, go ahead, she snapped, stepping forward like she actually thought she could intimidate me. Call them, and I'll tell them that you threatened my child, that you harassed us, and that you are an aggressive man who scared us so much we feared for our safety. I stared at her, stunned at the sheer audacity. Then I laughed, actually laughed. Lady, I said, shaking my head, there are cameras all over this property, cameras that caught you trespassing. making yourself at home, and letting your kid swim in my pool. So, yeah, let's call the cops and see who they believe." She paled, just for a second, then her face twisted into something ugly. "You're a disgusting excuse for a neighbor," she spat, grabbing her son's arm. "Come on, sweetie. We don't want to be around such a horrible, greedy man." The kid, to his credit, looked uncomfortable. He muttered something about the pool being nice before she yanked him toward the gate. She stomped off, knocking over my chair on purpose, like a child throwing a tantrum. As she marched through the gate, she turned back one last time and screamed, "I'll be reporting you to the HOA." I stared after her, baffled. I didn't even live in an HOA. The gate slammed shut. Silence settled over my backyard. I exhaled slowly, shaking my head as I reached for my phone. First thing tomorrow, I was installing a taller fence. I had barely finished my morning coffee when I heard it, the shrill, nasally voice of the woman I least wanted to see again. "You can't ignore me forever. Open up." I sighed, setting my mug down with a little more force than necessary. Of course. Of course she was back. Through my kitchen window, I saw her standing at my gate, one manicured hand on her hip, the other waving a clipboard like it was some holy decree. The ridiculous sun hat was gone, replaced by a stiff bob of aggressively blonde hair that framed a face set in righteous fury. Behind her, two other women in matching polo shirts, her backup dancers, apparently stood with crossed arms, looking every bit the suburban execution squad. I opened the door, but didn't step outside. I had a gut feeling I'd regret it if I did. "Can I help you?" I said, though I already knew the answer. Her eyes lit up, like a predator spotting wounded prey. "You can start by explaining why you think you're above the rules." "Excuse me?" She lifted the clipboard, flipping through pages with a dramatic flair. "I reported you to the HOA," she announced, like she had just declared war. "And after reviewing your property, we've found multiple violations, serious ones." I stared at her, then past her, at my house, then back at her. "You're joking." Her smug grin stretched wider. "No, sir. This is very serious. Your fence is too high. Your pool is improperly enclosed. Your landscaping is unkempt. And your outdoor furniture is not within the approved color scheme." I blinked. "I'm sorry. What?" One of the other women, short, glasses, an expression like she smelled something foul, nodded. "It's all right here in the HOA guidelines. You should have read them before moving in." I couldn't help it. I laughed, a full, uncontrollable, almost maniacal laugh. "I don't even live in an HOA." The lead Karen's eyes narrowed. "That's where you're wrong." "No, I'm pretty damn sure I'm not." She huffed, clearly annoyed that I wasn't immediately bowing to her authority. "Your property falls within the extended jurisdiction of the HOA. We had a meeting and voted on an annexation. This entire neighborhood is now part of the Glenwood Lakes Homeowners Association. That means you are part of the HOA, whether you like it or not." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. None came. "You voted my property into an HOA without my consent?" She nodded, pleased with herself. Democracy in action. "Lady, you can't just—" "Oh, but we can," she interrupted, flipping her clipboard around to show me some barely legible signatures on a printed-out document. "Majority rule, as stated in the bylaws. It's all perfectly legal." I rubbed my temples, trying to force some sanity into this conversation. "You can't retroactively force someone into an HOA. That's not how anything works." She clucked her tongue like a disappointed teacher. "Well, I suggest you get up to speed, because if you don't comply with these violations, you'll be facing some serious fines." I folded my arms. "Oh yeah? How much?" She glanced at her clipboard and smirked. $3,500. Due by the end of the month." I stared at her. She stared back, radiating entitlement so thick it was practically visible. I took a deep breath. "Get off my property. You're already in violation of HOA regulations, sir," she snapped. "You need to take this seriously." I take trespassing seriously. I shot back, and you're about 2 seconds from me calling the cops. Her expression flickered just for a second, but she recovered fast. Fine, she huffed. I tried to be civil, but don't say I didn't warn you. She turned on her heel and marched off, her two minions scurrying after her. I stood in my doorway, watching as they got into a golf cart, because of course they had a golf cart, and sped off down the street. I shut the door, exhaling slowly. This wasn't over. The next day, I woke up to a bright orange sticker slapped right onto my front door. Notice of HOA violation. Final warning: failure to comply will result in escalating fines and potential legal action. Attached to it was an invoice for $3,500. I tore it off the door and stormed back inside, flipping through the pages. It was insane. The HOA had already tacked on an additional $200 processing fee and an early compliance fee of $500 for a total of $4. $200. My blood boiled. That was it. They wanted a fight? They were about to get one. 2 hours later, I was sitting in my lawyer's office. "Are you serious?" he asked, flipping through the documents. As a heart attack, he shook his head, chuckling in disbelief. "They can't just annex your property into an HOA without consent. That's not how property law works. Let me handle this." "Please do," I muttered, "because if I handle it, it's not going to be legal." He laughed. "Oh, don't worry. We'll make this painful for them, legally." As I left his office, my phone buzzed. A new email. Subject: urgent HOA action required. Dear homeowner, you have failed to respond to previous notices regarding your non-compliance with HOA regulations. If you do not pay the outstanding balance immediately, we will be forced to take legal action. Additionally, an HOA representative will be visiting your property tomorrow morning to conduct an inspection. I clenched my jaw. An inspection? Oh, this was going to be fun. Because when they showed up tomorrow, they weren't going to find a compliant, scared homeowner. They were going to find someone ready for war. The next morning, I woke up ready for war. One had spent half the night digging through property records, checking legal precedents, and preparing for whatever nonsense the HOA had planned. My lawyer had already sent a cease and desist letter, but I knew better than to expect people like Karen to back down that easily. They thrived on intimidation and bureaucracy, but they had picked the wrong guy to mess with. At precisely 9:00 a.m., I heard the crunch of tires on my driveway. A sleek, way too fancy for an HOA black SUV rolled up, and out stepped Karen, clipboard in hand, flanked by two men in suits. Oh, they'd brought backup. Cute. I stepped out onto my porch, coffee in hand, and leaned against the railing. "Morning," I said, taking a slow sip. "You lost?" Karen's lips stretched into a tight, forced smile. "We're here for the inspection," she said, her voice dripping with fake authority. "As per HOA regulations, we're required to assess all properties under our jurisdiction." I let out a low chuckle. "See, that's the thing," I said, motioning to the folder tucked under my arm. "Your jurisdiction doesn't include my property. You don't have any legal claim over my land." The taller of the two, suits a guy who looked like he spent too much money on hair gel, cleared his throat. "Mr. Reynolds, under the new annexation agreement." "Stop right there," I cut in. "That agreement is illegal. You can't just vote someone's property into an HOA without their consent. My lawyer has already contacted you about this." Karen's eyes twitched, but she recovered quickly. "Well, that's your opinion," she said, tapping her clipboard like it was some kind of sacred text. "However, we are prepared to enforce compliance. If you refuse the inspection, we will escalate the matter legally." I smiled. "Oh, you mean trespassing?" I motioned to the camera mounted on my porch. "Go ahead. Step 1 foot onto my property, and I'll have video evidence of you breaking the law." That should make for a fun lawsuit. The second suit, a shorter guy with an unfortunate mustache, shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe we should." Karen shot him a glare so sharp it could have sliced steel. Mr. Reynolds, we are simply trying to ensure community standards are met. I crossed my arms. Oh? Like when you let yourself onto my property without permission? Or when you slapped an illegal fine on my door? Or maybe when you tried to extort me for $4,200? Karen's smile tightened, but she wasn't done yet. I understand you're upset, she said condescendingly, but this will go a lot smoother if you just comply. Otherwise, I held up a hand. Otherwise, what? You'll try to fine me again? Good luck enforcing a fine from an organization that has no legal authority over me. The taller suit cleared his throat. If you don't work with us, we may have to take this to court. I grinned. Oh, please do. Because I guarantee that lawsuit will bankrupt your HOA when you lose. Karen's face turned red, her nostrils flaring. She was running out of options, and she knew it. For a moment, I thought she might actually leave. Then she spotted the fence. Oh, she purred, her tone shifting to something sly. That fence is definitely a violation. I frowned. What? She turned to the mustache guy. Write that down, she ordered, pointing at the wooden privacy fence that lined my backyard. It's over the 6-foot height limit. Non-compliant. I stared at her. Are you actually serious? Deadly serious, she shot back, her smirk returning. That fence will need to come down immediately. My patience snapped. Karen, that fence has been here longer than your entire damn HOA. She waved a dismissive hand. Irrelevant. The rules apply now, and you are subject to them. I let out a slow breath. You're going to regret this. Her smirk widened. Oh, I highly doubt that. By that evening, I had everything I needed. Turns out, my fence wasn't just legally built, it was historically protected. A little digging through county records revealed that my property had a grandfathered exemption due to a long-standing land agreement. That meant Karen's entire argument was dead on arrival. I emailed the documentation to my lawyer, who immediately drafted a cease and desist letter and a counterclaim for harassment, defamation, and attempted property fraud. Then, just for fun, I CC'd the county zoning office, because, as it turns out, Karen's own house, the one she prided herself on being the epitome of HOA compliance, her fence was out of code. By the next morning, an official county inspector had paid her a visit, and unlike her little HOA goons, they actually had real authority. I was enjoying my coffee on the porch when Karen came storming down the sidewalk, face redder than a stop sign. She slammed a piece of paper against my fence. You think this is funny? She shrieked. I took the paper from her hand, a notice of violation. Oh, this was golden. I looked up at her and grinned. Karen, I said slowly, savoring every word, did you just get fined for violating county zoning laws? Her jaw clenched so hard I thought her teeth might crack. This is your fault. I leaned against my perfectly legal fence. No, Karen, this is called karma. She let out a strangled noise, spun on her heel, and stormed off. I watched her go, shaking my head as I took another sip of coffee. One battle down, but I had a feeling the war wasn't over yet, and I was more than ready for whatever came next. I had barely finished my victory coffee when I heard the distant rumble of an engine, followed by the unmistakable sound of something heavy being unloaded in front of my driveway. I stepped out onto my porch, mug still in hand, just in time to see a cement truck pulling away, leaving behind a freshly installed HOA property. No trespassing sign planted squarely in front of my house. I blinked. No, she wouldn't. But as I stepped forward, my suspicions were confirmed. There she was, Karen, standing at the curb with her clipboard, looking insufferably smug as she gestured to a group of workers who were busy installing a brand new sidewalk that extended across my driveway. Oh, she absolutely would. I clenched my jaw. Karen, I called out, striding toward her. What the hell do you think you're doing? She turned. flashing a saccharine smile. "Oh, good morning, Mr. Reynolds. We're just making some much-needed improvements to our lovely neighborhood. Isn't it wonderful?" I pointed at the giant slab of wet cement now blocking my driveway. "You poured a sidewalk across my property," she gasped, pressing a hand to her chest in fake shock. "Oh, dear. That's not your property anymore, remember?" She tapped the clipboard. "According to the HOA expansion plan, this section of land is now part of the community walking path. We wouldn't want to hinder pedestrian access, would we?" My fingers tightened around my coffee mug. "Karen, you do not own this land." Her smirk didn't waver. "We'll let the courts decide that." Oh, she was delusional. And I was done playing nice. I took a step closer, lowering my voice. "You need to move that sign and tear up that sidewalk. Right now." Karen's smile stretched wider, like a cat playing with a wounded mouse. "Oh, but that would be destruction of HOA property." She gave a dramatic sigh. "And that would mean legal consequences, wouldn't it?" I exhaled sharply, running a hand through my hair. "You're insane." She clicked her tongue. "I prefer dedicated." I clenched my jaw. "You know what, Karen? Let's see how dedicated you are when I bring in my own crew." "Oh, don't be petty," she scoffed. "This is happening with or without your cooperation." I pulled out my phone. "Let's see how the city feels about that." For the first time, her smirk faltered. 2 hours later, I stood next to a very irritated city inspector as he squinted at the freshly poured sidewalk, shaking his head. "Who approved this?" he asked, flipping through his paperwork. I gestured toward Queen Karen, who was now hovering nearby, her usual smugness replaced with barely concealed panic. He turned to her, frowning. "You got a permit for this?" Karen cleared her throat, gripping her clipboard like a lifeline. "The HOA has full authority over this neighborhood," she declared. "As per our new expansion guidelines." "Yeah, that's not how permits work," the inspector interrupted. "And last I checked, this land isn't HOA property." Karen's eyes flickered to me, her jaw tightening. "We were under the impression that—" "Well, you were wrong," the inspector snapped. "This is unauthorized construction on private property." I folded my arms. "Which means—" The inspector gave Karen a look like he was barely restraining himself from rolling his eyes. "Which means she's responsible for having it removed." Karen visibly twitched. "Remove?" she echoed, as if the word physically pained her. "You can't be serious." "Dead serious," the inspector shot back. "You have 24 hours to get a crew in here and tear it up. Otherwise, the city will do it, and you'll be looking at a hefty fine." Karen's face went ghostly pale. But the community doesn't overrule property law," the inspector said flatly. "Now either you fix it or the city does. Your call." I could practically hear her teeth grinding. The next morning, I woke up to the glorious sound of jackhammers ripping through cement. Karen stood at the curb, watching in pure misery as her precious sidewalk was destroyed piece by piece. She caught sight of me on my porch and shot me a glare that could have melted steel. I smiled, waved, took a sip of my coffee. She turned away sharply, her shoulders tense with rage and humiliation. I thought that would be the end of it. That after getting publicly humiliated, after having to pay out of pocket for her own mistake, she'd finally back down. But no, that night I received a letter in my mailbox, a formal notarized document. I unfolded it, scanning the words, my stomach tightening as I read, "Dear Mr. Reynolds, due to your continued non-compliance with HOA regulations, the board has voted unanimously to proceed with a lien against your property in order to recover outstanding fees and fines totaling $6,500. Failure to remit payment immediately will result in further legal action." I stared at the paper, disbelief flooding through me. A lien? They were trying to put a lien on my house? Over fake fines from an HOA I wasn't even a part of? I set the paper down, took a deep, slow breath. Karen had just escalated this, into a full-blown war, and she had no idea that she was about to lose everything. I read the letter again, feeling my pulse pound against my skull. A lien? She was actually trying to put a lien on my property over fake fines from an HOA that had no legal claim over me? This was it. Karen had officially crossed the line. I wasn't just going to fight back. I was going to bury her. The next morning, I was sitting across from my lawyer, Stephen, who had taken one look at the letter and immediately burst into laughter. "This is a joke, right?" he said, flipping the paper over like he expected to find a punchline on the back. "Oh, I wish," I muttered, rubbing my temples. But knowing Karen, she's dead serious. Stephen leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. "All right, let's play this out. She's attempting to file a lien against a property that isn't legally under HOA jurisdiction. That alone is a massive legal issue. But since she's trying to collect fines that were never valid in the first place, that's attempted fraud." I sat up. "Fraud?" Stephen grinned. "Oh yeah, and the best part? If she actually files this lien with the county, that's officially filing false documents, which means we can sue her personally." Now that was interesting. Stephen tapped the paper. "We're not just going to fight this. We're going to turn the tables so hard, she'll be lucky if she's left with so much as a garden gnome in her front yard." 3 days later, my lawyer filed a formal cease and desist order against the HOA, demanding that all fake fines and threats against my property be dropped immediately, or they'd be facing a real lawsuit for fraud, harassment, and defamation. But I wasn't done, not even close, because while Stephen was handling the legal side, I had been doing some digging of my own. And what I found? Oh, it was beautiful. The next HOA meeting was open to the public, so naturally I showed up front row, arms crossed, smiling like the devil himself. Karen's expression twisted the second she saw me, but she couldn't stop the meeting just because I was there. "Before we begin," she announced, clearing her throat, "I'd like to remind everyone that our association is committed to order and fairness in our community." I almost laughed. She continued, "Now, regarding the matter of the unpaid fines and subsequent lien placed on Mr. Reynolds' property—" "Oh, you mean the illegal lien?" I cut in, my voice carrying through the room. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Karen's jaw clenched. "You are not recognized to speak at this." "Oh, don't worry," I said, pulling out a stack of documents and holding them up for the entire room to see. "I won't take up much of your time. I just thought the board and the homeowners here who actually fund this circus should know that Karen here has been lying to all of you." Gasps. Someone whispered, "What's he talking about?" I grinned. "Let's start with the basics, shall we? First, she tried to annex my property without my consent, which, by the way, isn't just illegal, but completely unenforceable. Then, she fined me for non-existent violations, and when I refused to pay, she threatened to place a fraudulent lien on my home." Eyes darted toward Karen. She was visibly sweating now. A man in the back spoke up. "Wait, she can't do that, right?" "Nope," I said. "And if she had actually filed it with the county, she'd be looking at felony charges for filing false documents." The room exploded. "Karen, is this true? You told us this was all legal. My cousin got sued over a fake lien. This is serious." Karen's face had turned a delightful shade of panic-stricken red. This is just a misunderstanding," she stammered. "He's twisting things around." "Oh, I haven't even gotten to the good part yet," I said, flipping to another document. Because while I was doing my research, I also happened to come across some interesting financial records from the HOA's budget reports. Dead. Silence. Karen froze. I smiled. "Tell me, Karen, how exactly do you explain the $15,000 discrepancy in the HOA's maintenance budget?" The color drained from her face so fast, I thought she might faint. "Oh yeah," I said, savoring the moment. "Turns out, Karen here has been misappropriating HOA funds, and by that, I mean stealing. A collective roar erupted from the crowd. People were on their feet. $15,000? She stole our dues. I knew something was off with the books. I want a full audit. Karen stumbled back, gripping her clipboard like it was a life raft. This is a smear campaign. He's lying. But she knew it was over. Because I had proof. And now, so did everyone else. By the end of the night, Karen was removed as HOA president in an emergency vote. A criminal investigation into embezzlement and fraud was officially underway. And as for that fraudulent lien, yeah, that never even made it to the county office. Turns out, Karen had been bluffing, hoping I'd be dumb enough to pay up without a fight. Big mistake. A month later, the HOA itself collapsed. Turns out, without Karen's shady financial games and intimidation tactics, there wasn't much holding it together. Homeowners voted to dissolve the entire thing, and all those ridiculous rules and fines, gone. And Karen, well, the last I heard, she was facing multiple lawsuits, one from the HOA's former treasurer, another from a group of angry homeowners, and a particularly brutal one from me. Because if she thought she could extort, threaten, and steal from me without consequences, she was dead wrong. And as I sat on my porch, sipping my coffee, watching Karen's house go up for sale, I realized something. There's nothing more satisfying than watching karma do its job.